We are all worthy, strong, and committed, and we are ready to go beyond our own limitations. Welcome back, my friends and loved ones, to the Rebel Minded Podcast. I'm your host, Zach, with my co-host, Thor, of course, and I'm here as a friend, a creator, a powerlifter, and a provocateur. And we are here to learn to question the one thing that keeps us from our best, ourselves. Join me as we dive deep to question and strengthen our communication and our vulnerability, create a healthier mind to commit to our goals, and how to give more to our lovers and the world. We're going to face the uncomfortable truths of what it means to be authentically and uniquely flawed, but awesome humans. So, let's get rebel-minded. Also, I'll bring in stories of all things powerlifting, Thor shenanigans, and probably some embarrassing mishaps. Let's do this. What is up, my beautiful humans? I'm your host, Zach, leader of this Rebel Minded podcast, and we're here to provoke and create thought and skepticism and to question the fuck out of everything. Now, the guy I brought on today is one of my up-and-coming favorite people, to be honest. We collaborate really well. I love to hear him speak. He's very in-depth about what he is, and he's a mix of like monk and guru and all these things. Master male balance, and he's such a great guy. And the discussion we had covered so many things, and I can't wait for you guys to hear all of what it was about. He is a men's group facilitator and a men's coach, and he's a podcast host of his own, and he's got over 400 episodes, and the guy is he's had some conversations, and not only is he good at it, he knows what he's talking about. So before we get too carried away, how was the week for everybody? What crazy things have been happening? I want to hear about the crazy things that have been happening. I having a little bit of a rough time with Thor. He's picking up some age. He's getting slow. Getting my heart set for that. And started prep for another competition. And we start a new program this next week that is, I guess, built by a trainer for Olympic athletes. So it's going to be also very interesting. So as we move into this next powerlifting meet, I'm hoping to really up my numbers. And I became a representative of a supplement brand, something I've wanted to do for so long. And it's been cool to finally be an ambassador for a company that I actually really enjoy their products. So before we get too carried away, I hope everybody out there understands that the progress that we make is not only time consuming, but very hard to understand and see that progress. And it's not just by tomorrow that you're going to be able to turn around and be another person. You may be able to change your thoughts for a day, a week, but you're breaking a conditioning. And the reason I say this is because I have so many people within my own world that are looking to change, that are frustrated about change, that are shaming themselves for not being able to change. And the truth is that it's that battle of the white and black wolf inside of you. Which one are you going to feed? And when we have a catalyst for change, when we have an epiphany, when we decide we finally want to start getting our lives together, when we start wanting to be in shape, to eat better, to think stronger, to be more articulate, to be of better value to the world around us. Most of the time, we've been feeding that darker version of us, the one that we despise so much. We've been feeding it for so long that it's turned into a glutton, and it's overpowered the white wolf. But it's our ability to change that ratio that really gets us to move. Because if one wolf can take power over the other, it can always be switched. It just takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of courage. So whatever it is that you're trying to change, be courageous, step forward, and don't be afraid of being afraid. Don't be afraid of what other people are thinking, because for the most part, people really don't give a fuck. And that should be your freedom. People care a lot less than what you think they do. So without further ado, let's jump into this episode. This will be episode 66 with Vinny Brusco. So I kind of want to dig into this efficiency thing with men, and also because, I think all of us have problems with it, and we go through all these readings, and we have all these role models of the guys that are efficient. I personally attached to certain men out there indirectly because I didn't have the best father figure when it was the best time,
Sure.
when I didn't have somebody to really influence me. But I guess, what do you think about this? Because it's been on my mind for a while, like what it is that we need to really get our focus in and compartmentalize those things in a healthy way, and understand what it is that makes our progress. You know what I mean? It seems like a lot of guys right now are struggling with that action and that confidence and that don't give a fuck attitude that isn't meant to hurt anybody else, but means that I care about my self-care and my goals first before I worry about expectations of others. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And it's multifaceted, right? It's like, just to go into
so deep.
Go back a little bit. It's so deep. And, to go back, like with the dad thing and having two children of my own, I know that balance of wanting to guide, but also wanting to steer, right? There's a difference there.
Yeah.
Like I realize that I need to be the bumpers on my kids' bowling lane, but I can't throw the ball down the lane for them. Like I need them to do it, but I need to kind of bumper them back and forth, but I can only bumper them back and forth within my own capacity, right? So with your dad or with anybody, I really try my best to get away from judging people or allowing people at their level to hinder my own growth or potential or expectation, right? Because people are going to operate from the frequency where they are. You want to use frequency, you want to use vibration, you want to use mindset, but they are only capable of operating within their own capacity, right? So I look at I use my children for an example. I can't expect my daughter to understand quantum physics. Right. I can't expect her to have the emotional awareness that some adults don't even have. Right.
Yeah, man.
All I can do is attempt to instill that in her and show her at certain opportunities where an emotional, like she she had this Barbie shoe that she was trying to stand up. This was maybe like a year and a half ago. And she was trying to stand it up and she was so frazzled by it. And she's like, I just want to stand it up. And I said, Emma, step back, take a deep breath, right? And I promise you that the Barbie shoe, now I had no idea. I was just going on a whim. I promise you the Barbie shoe will stand up because the energy you're giving this Barbie shoe is out of whack, right? You're too frazzled by it. So she stepped back, she took a deep breath, and then she stood up and it stood up. I was like, yes, right?
Damn.
But the point was, your relationship with this thing is just too rigid. You're white knuckling the bat and you're trying to hit a home run. That's not how we accomplish things, right? You're trying to grab life. Just cool down a little bit. So anytime she gets a little frazzled, I'm like, Barbie shoe, or like she had this situation with her school laptop, and I'm like, laptop. And it's just like these small reminders that we need to recognize like our emotional or energetic state. I still need it as an adult. I tell my wife, like, listen, if I'm going off the rails with the kids, I need you to bring me back sometimes. If I'm not showing up to being the best father I could be, I need you to bring me back sometimes. And it's our internal narrative that we need to subscribe to and not worry about all these detractors. You know what I mean? Like whether it be a parent, a friend, I'm listening to this series by, Joseph Rodriguez, and he was talking about the ideal self and how we have this ideal self of who and what we are and how we want to show up in the world. And we embody that through our actions, right? We embody that through things that we do, and we test that version of ourselves against the world. And when we get feedback that isn't propelling or supporting that embodiment of our future self, we now go back to the laboratory of our mind, and we have a tendency to change that embodiment. Or we could say, okay, and we can learn and we could test it in different ways. So I think that when it comes to parenting in general, or just relationships with others, whether it be your parents or friends or coworkers, it's so important to just stay true to your embodiment of that future version of yourself. And the only way you get to that embodiment or that future version of yourself is by internal harmonious conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I honestly, I was thinking of a million things as you're going through that. But no. Let's tackle this though, because I think most men are being, and most people, I just like to direct this towards men because I have more of that personal experience. I have that relatability.
Sure.
But it seems like most men are so ran by a couple different things, and a couple different things that they may not understand as well as they could, in order to direct themselves on the path that they want to go. It seems like we're so built by, and this goes for all people, in my opinion, is we're built on these layers and layers and layers of expectations from the world and from other people, from society, from our culture, from our religion, like all of this stuff, like all this expectation. And because the real version of ourselves is so deep, we don't understand, or we can't see it almost, and it's almost relatable to that inner child situation thing. Yeah. So I think a lot of men are ran by these external expectations of that is being abrasive with like our natural state. Like our natural state is like, we want to be valuable. We want to be efficient. We want to be progressive. We want to have really good direction. We want to have focus. And at the same time, they're muddied up by the expectations of the world, because things like the American dream are in the way. Like it's a superficial version that's being confused with our instinctive way of being. Does that kind of make sense? Like, yeah. We're confusing one with the other. And so it seems like we're so led by the world's expectations, and we're also so traumatically affected by things that we may have not gotten when we were kids, certain childhood traumas, certain suppressions, certain also expectations, back then. And I think that's where so many men are having such a hard time in being strong, passionate, and compassionate and empathetic and directive human beings. I see so many guys that are ran by the world instead of running their direction that is purposeful to them. There's so much authenticity missing, it seems like.
Yeah, and I think we're using men as the example here, but I think that's people in general. I think overall we all deal with the loss of our essence at some point. I see it with my daughter. Not to, I use a lot of my children really are this. Like I get goosebumps just talking about, but they're this really weird revisitation of childhood for me.
Yeah.
I really like, and I've shifted my coaching more towards dads, because it's the one thing I will say I'm fucking great at. Like, I'm a great fucking dad. Like, I don't think I'm great at anything else. Being a dad, I will own that shit. Because I love it. I love being a dad. And I look at the world all over again through, child's eyes in a different lens. And I see it with my daughter more so now that she's in school, and now we're seeing, culture coming into play, me coming into play, my wife coming into play, and her, the words she chooses to use, the things she's interested in, the way she'll say like, oh, well, this kid has that, like her essence is really being removed from her. Right.
Yeah.
And it's so important to for me as a father and for my wife as a mother to keep her intact in her essence, or at least keep that relationship with her essence. Because you don't lose that, to your point. You don't lose who you are. You just bury it under a bunch of shit, you know, whether it be emotional shit, physical shit, tangible shit, whatever it is, you just bury all of that. And I think what happens is there's an awareness that kind of starts to make itself known at different phases of your life. And I think that's, whether you want to call it your child self, whatever it is, I think that's your essence trying to come back through. And what happens is we start to replace, you know, the reward system and the dopamine in our minds, and we outsource it to these other things, whether it be cars or houses or food or clothing, tangible things. We outsource it to these tangible things, and they start to swap with our own intrinsic happiness. So then we start to realize and say, oh, well, if I get this car, I'll be happy. If I get this bank account, I'll be happy. And what, you know, the mindset is that happiness is this end goal. It's this finish line that you're going to cross. You're going to go, yay, I did it. And someone's going to put a fucking medal around your neck and give you a bouquet of flowers. And you could stand there and go, I'm happy now. But it's not that. Happiness is not a finish line. It's a current state of being. It's an essence. It's an energy. And wherever you could find that happiness, I think it's important to follow that, right? Follow that happiness, follow your joy. Whatever kind of comes through, right? Follow that rather than the tangible expressions of that. There's nothing wrong with nice shit. I love shit, right? I used to be I'm a pack rat hoarder, right? Or at least I used to be, right? But I've also changed my relationship with things. You know, I've consciously changed my relationship with things, you know, and that's a hard shift to make, but I think ultimately it's a healthier shift to make.
Yeah. No, there's something I've always had a struggle explaining this outwardly, you know, towards other people. And I think the difficulty is because people have such a love of things. And I agree. It's not saying that you can't have them, but it's like this idea that is showing your success. And maybe, you know, maybe you do start to earn all this money and do all these things and like be able to take all these vacations, and you have whatever image you want, right? But you can always be in the same state of mind that is never actually satisfied because you haven't done certain internal work. You haven't understood where your emotional state is, or, you know, understanding presence, or understanding what you're saying, like the mindset of enjoying what's there and, you know, enjoying things for what they are. Sometimes I feel like I'm trying to separate external things from internal acceptance, almost, you know, of saying, well, you know, you should be a monk, or you should be able to be homeless and be happy. This is not exactly what I'm going for. I think
I get it.
But, well, I think, you know, for my personal journey, I had to get rid of a lot of stuff to prove to myself that I didn't need them. Because even when I had all the things, I had almost everything that I wanted. The only thing that I was missing was like the woman in my life. And then I had her. And then I realized that through her, there came a lot of truth that I had that I couldn't hide from anymore, because she was getting to know me, and there was no way that I was going to get out of that. Like, I had certain insecurities. I had certain, you know, mindset issues. I had certain internal efficiencies or lack of efficiencies that weren't, I couldn't bear anymore, you know? So I got rid of all my things to try to change my direction and try to change my attachment to certain things. And what I realized was there's a lot of internal work that I still had to do, because even then, you know, being out of less debt, even having less financial stress, it didn't make things any better. Like, it can be the same on both sides. You can have nothing and be miserable, and you can have everything and be miserable, or vice versa. You can have everything and be stoked, and you can have nothing and be stoked about life, you know, whatever. It's that internal mindset of understanding like what you're after is important, and you have the focus, and then you have the drive, and like you love the people that you're around and the work that you do. And I think I have a hard time dialing down how to express that, not just for other people, but also for myself. You know?
Yeah, I mean,
How do you tackle that?
I think a big part of it is the internal conversation that you're having with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that you're saying yourself and reminding yourself and reiterating to yourself on a micro level, right? Like, yes, you could have an overall mindset that's healthy, but if the smaller blades of grass in your yard are corrupt, it's going to start to bleed into the other parts. I don't know why I use blades of grass. I don't know why. I think because
I don't like it, actually.
well, the other day, I'm going to tell you why. The other day I worked out and then I was laying on the grass and I was looking at one. I wasn't stoned at all, but I was looking at one blade of grass and I really stopped. And I was like, this is one blade of grass.
Mm-hmm.
One. This is one blade of grass, right? On my small little front patch of grass, right? And think how many blades of grass there are in the world, right?
Yeah.
And then I had like the connection of like, well, you're just one blade of grass, right?
Yeah.
And this huge fucking, think how much grass is in the world, right?
Yeah.
It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is one. And then I looked around, I was like, there's so much fucking grass here. And there's a small little patch of lawn in my front yard.
Yeah.
This is nothing.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit. So, I think the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves on the micro level, what you're saying day in and day out, moment after moment,
Mm-hmm.
really is the game changer, right? It's really where you start to shift your approach to the 3D reality that you interface with.
Mm-hmm.
And I could think back of when early in quarantine, when I was doing yoga, and I use this example a lot, but I was doing the early morning yoga in my living room at 4 a.m. Everyone's asleep. I'm watching this video and this girl is like a perfect L. Like she's just like, okay, now raise your legs. And she's just like L. And I'm like, my knees are bent. My hamstrings are shaking. And the internal voice comes on. It's like, what are you doing? You're embarrassing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally stopped. And in that moment, I was like, first off, who am I embarrassing myself in front of?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's nobody up. Right? And who's the you that's that's calling me out on this embarrassment, right? You're embarrassing yourself. That means I'm not that voice, right? That voice is something else that's dictating a self-image in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now I had a choice there where I could have turned it off, went back to sleep and said, oh man, that was uncomfortable. Or I stopped myself and addressed it. It was like, what the fuck? Like in front of who? Who's being embarrassed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now when I'm working out, that voice has been shifted and is now like my motivator. When I'm like, oh God, I don't want to do, I'm like, no, motherfucker, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go. Let's
Mm-hmm.
go. Sure, I've changed the relation. The voice is the same, right? It's maybe it's sociopathic. I have no idea. Maybe I'm bipolar. I have no idea. But
Mm-hmm.
the point is the voice is the same. I've just changed my relationship with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've changed the narrative of it where it's there to keep me small, where now it's there to help me grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where people get tripped up because that awareness comes, right? And we go through the hierarchy of needs. Once our basic needs are met, it's to your point earlier, like maybe the basic needs of people are just, basic food, nothing crazy, nothing elaborate. And then we get to, up the hierarchy of needs of self-actualization. And then what happens is rather than breaking the threshold of that and going into the conscientious hierarchy of needs, right? And now becoming consciously competent and going through those, we just stay within that bubble and we try to have better cars, bigger houses, better
Mm-hmm.
food. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's the relationship we have with those things and what we're telling ourselves in our mind and that conversation we're having that, changes the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, in summarized version, I guess, or
There's no such thing as real quick in my world.
Yeah, that's probably true. Can you explain hierarchy of needs to people that may not understand what that means?
Sure. So it's the idea of our basic needs in life. So it's like food, shelter, relationships, and then there's self-actualization. It's a pyramid. I don't remember which one's in which one. They're all pretty. I think the first one's like food and then shelter, whatever it is. And at the top of it is self-actualization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is like the recognition of who and what you are for the most part. And now there's also the hierarchy of needs when it comes to conscientious, which is going from, unconsciously incompetent to consciously competent, right? And it's the growth of that. And it's becoming aware, which is almost pretty much like, in Jungian psychology, it's bringing the subconscious conscious, right? It's bringing the unknown to the known. But what I think what happens intrinsically is that we get to self-actualization, which is the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And rather than going and crossing the threshold into the unknown, right? Because it's very uncomfortable, we go back down to the other levels and we try to fatten them up to make ourselves happier. We try to get better food, like I said, and better cars. And there's nothing wrong with those things. But it's, again, the relationship we have with those things. And are you coming into those things with a conscientious approach of them? Or are you just trying to fill up and get fatter and become gluttonous?
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So even though you're still having a relationship with those things, it's that type of relationship that you're having. So that foundation is actually less dense almost. I guess this is the way I would kind of visualize it, which would make it less heavy, which would make it less efficient, would make it less foundationally strong almost. So if you have all of your food, you kind of go over the top and, it's not food that maybe is the best for you, or you have a relationship and you use sex to kind of cover up the other issues that, it's more about sex and image and everything rather than it is about understanding, compassion, and empathy, or, in your work, it's more about how much money you're making or how efficient things are getting done rather than the importance of the relationship with the people that are inside of that company, that kind of thing. Does that kind of sound like what you're saying? Ish?
Yeah.
So you get too carried away with the dopamine dumps and the perfection of things and the passion of things rather than understanding the whole of being in that and being mindful of what those things actually do for you, maybe?
Well, I think A, for you, right? B, with you, right? And it kind of goes back to what you were saying in regards to becoming a monk, right? Like the idea of that, I think kind of, and kind of getting rid of your shit, right? Like a while ago, I kind of switched over to a pretty minimalistic wardrobe, which for me is still a lot of shit, right? It's still a lot of stuff, right? But I was like, oh, this is pretty minimalistic for me. And the moment I started doing that, people are like, are you okay? Is everything? And I appreciate the sentiment. I appreciate people reaching out and making sure I'm okay. But it's amazing once you start to change how you show up in the world and how you want to show up in the world. It's amazing to me how people, it starts to question their own narrative, right? Conversations you have with people change, and it makes them have to, it doesn't make them have to, but it puts their back against the wall, puts them in a corner where like, oh, how do I remember, like, how do I have a conversation around this shit now? Right. Because once you show up and you start to show up differently and more authentically, it can make people very uncomfortable. I remember early, like a while ago, when I was talking about some of my experiences in sensory deprivation tank, and I was sitting around my closest friends, and like 2 out of 3 of them were like, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Like they didn't say that outwardly, but the energetic exchange was like, okay, dude. It. Yeah. Like, okay, dude, like, all right, we lost Vin. See you later. And the other was like, oh, cool. Like he didn't know how to handle either. And I love these guys. And they're like brothers to me. And I just understand that they are, and some of them, we've changed the dynamic of our conversations since then. But if I didn't show up in that way authentically, right, maybe the conversations would have stayed water cooler. It would have been about the game, or it would have been about the bullshit that I really don't care about anymore. So it is about just the relationship with these things. And the idea, going back to the monk part, the idea that you could lose it all, but it doesn't change who you actually are. That's the key thing, I think, with all of it, right?
Removing your identity from the external.
Yeah. Moving the identity from the external, but also realizing the external is a potential expression of the internal, right? It becomes an energetic chi of who and what you want to be, the embodiment of your ideal self. So when you can lean into that embodiment with less resistance, you're going to lean into it more and more and more. But when you come against resistance, there's an opportunity there to see it as a test or a challenge, right? To break through and level up your game.
So the thing that I am wanting for men to do, I was talking about that thing of men's kind of living. Once you kind of start to feel people and you understand energies, you see it all over the place.
Yeah.
You see it, and it's not exactly a negative judgment of people. It's a realization of a psychological mind fuck by society.
Sure.
Almost, and you see so many people doing the same thing, like being this. They may be in different jobs, but their energy is all the same. Right. And I'm not saying I'm void of that. Like I was saying before, I think we have layers and layers of expectations of what the world, and the work is removing those layers. The work is removing what you think you're supposed to be for other people, because deep down, regardless of your friends and family and all your loved ones and like your business relationships, your personal relationships, whatever, nobody gives a fuck enough to change it for you. To make the change to your authenticity for you. You have to be able to do the work to create your own light, and they're going to support you in that. But I don't think anybody can give a fuck enough to change it for you. Reach out a hand and like give you the opportunity to have some sort of line, you know what I mean? But the line doesn't move without the work that you do. Maybe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think most people really don't give a fuck at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. So why are we so worried about it?
Because of our own fears.
Mm-hmm.
Fear, judgment, fear, self-acceptance, right? We're tribal people, so we don't want to be ostracized from the tribe, That's why when you find people who have a similar mindset, you're like, oh, okay, like here are my people. I could rap with you.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, most people don't really give a shit. People are really operating in their own world, and good for them. Like that is how you grow. It's to your point, right? Like that's how you do grow and develop and change and become whatever you want to call it, enlightened, whatever the word you want to be is by going inward, right? And showing up for yourself and doing these things for yourself. And that's how you could ultimately serve people around you, whether it be family, friends, coworkers, employees, employers, whatever it is. You can't, it's the old, you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's where a lot of people get tripped up, whether it be men, women, whatever it is that we think that we need to give all the time, right? Give, which is true. We should be giving, but we cannot give unless, there are certain things in my life that I know I need to do, right? Yep. Whether it be working out, jujitsu, podcasting, family time, whatever it is. Like there are certain things that I need to do for myself in order to function and operate in the best way that I can, right? And the more of those things I could check off on a daily basis, the better I feel at the end of the day, right? And it becomes a checklist of life. Like, all right, well, this is what I want. This is what my best day is. And if I could sprinkle in a version of that, some way, shape, or form, awesome.
Yeah.
If I can get 2 or 3 things out of the list of 10, great. If I can get 10 out of 10, amazing.
Yeah.
But I need to ultimately sit with myself and feel what is the best, what feels the best. And then I need to extrapolate that and try to implement that on a day-to-day basis, moment to moment even.
Do you think, because my assumption, which it's not fair to assume, especially because everybody's so different, but just go in theory with this, is that there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of dissatisfaction in a lot of men's minds. And ultimately, I think men, number one, don't know how. It is very difficult, especially if we've been told to only feel certain things. If we only ever feel anger, if we only ever feel happiness, and we've been told to just use our skills to survive in life, right? We get uncomfortable with feeling anything, even if it's just meant for ourselves, right? So I see a lot of frustration, dissatisfaction, misery, and depression of men. Maybe not major depression, maybe not clinical depression, but guys that are kind of sitting every day, right?
Suicide is higher in men than any,
Oh, totally.
Higher, yeah. Right. So, I mean, there is a clinical depression there that's not being addressed.
So do you think which I already know how I feel about this. Do
Sure.
you think that there is such an important action in being mindful of what you're doing, like seriously being present with just yourself and asking yourself what it is the fuck that you want, and repeating that question? That's how I feel, is like repeating the question over and over until you actually have some sort of epiphany, or you have some more understanding of who you are. Because I think it's so easy to question, like, why am I miserable? Oh, because I don't work hard enough. Well, ask yourself that question every fucking day and try to get to that point of just being present and see how much that changes. How much will that adapt? How much will you actually start answering the inner child in yourself? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it goes even deeper than that.
Okay.
Why wouldn't I?
This is how we know Vinny.
I think it goes deeper than that. I think you don't even ask yourself any questions.
Okay.
I think you sit in the silence. I mean, that has been, I talk a lot about the sensory deprivation tank because it has been a tool for me outside of daily meditation. And when I don't meditate, I know, it put like, I'll get to a space and I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with me? And I'm like, oh, I haven't meditated in 3 days, and I truly believe, and there's different expressions of getting yourself into a flow state, whether it be lifting, jujitsu, rock climbing, surfing. I think those are all really important, embodiments of the ultimate version of you, right? Embodiments of the ideal self are these windows through flow state. I think they're super important. And it's so important to, try different things to achieve flow state. I've experienced it surfing, and I don't surf. I've surfed once, but I experienced a flow state, a mindful aspect of life, a window into peace or harmony within myself through surfing. I've experienced it through jujitsu and yoga and eating and playing with my children and being with my wife and sitting around the fire. Like, there's all these different expressions of that. But I don't think, ultimately, I think it boils down to not even asking yourself the question, but sitting in the silence. Because what happens is when you're sitting in the silence, and this is like sensory deprivation tank stuff, and it kind of translates over to meditating as well. When you're sitting in the silence, right, for the first 30, 40 minutes of it, right, you're just, like your brain is all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's what people are like, well, I can't meditate. I'm like, well, my mind races. That's the point, right? It's not to quiet the mind, right? It's to get control of the mind, right? It's to see the mind and see the thoughts that you're having, not as the self, but as the observer of those thoughts, right? And it takes time, especially in like, if you put yourself in a vacuum of a sensory deprivation tank, it takes at least 20, 30, 40 minutes for all that dust to settle, right? Yeah. And then to allow the self to come through and speak, right? And however you want to frame that or feel that, whatever it is, it doesn't make a difference. But it takes time for that dust of the mind to settle and for everything else to come up. And then in that coming up, that's where the real radical, honest conversations, where you could say to yourself, what do I want? But I think intrinsically, we all do already know what we want. It's like we were talking about earlier, the societal norms and expectations that prevent us from stepping into that space wholeheartedly and lean into that embodiment of who you want to be wholeheartedly. So I think sitting in the silence, for me, it's not even a question of it's a matter of what comes up and how do you handle and interface with what comes up.
Yeah, it seems like, and tell me if I'm wrong here. I know everybody kind of works at a different pace, speed, mindset. But for me, the initial thing was the more I slowed down to pay attention, the more understood I knew of what I needed to do when I did take action. I think that we get so carried away with the action itself that, I mean, you can take action any direction that you want. So if you're taking action on the expectations of society, you're only pulling yourself farther away from what you need, right? So I guess I've seen a lot of successful people become successful because they actually slow down rather than speed it up enough to understand yourself more, to understand your genuine internal link, like your soul and your heart's passion, like what it is that you need. Does that connect with you at all?
Yeah, I think there are always moments to be present, always moments to be mindful. There's a great book, Now is the Way, by Corey Allen, and he talks about how there's always opportunity, right? Whether it be brushing your teeth or taking a shower or having a cup of coffee in the morning, there are always moments to be present. And
even in
automatic things. And they're probably best in automatic things because you're autonomous, right? Like you could just go into autopilot. That's why, like, when you're driving sometimes and you're driving to a place, you know where to go. You kind of just like your body just knows what it's doing. And it's in those moments where you can just be still, right? Having the cup of coffee, brushing your teeth, taking a shower. But I think what happens with so many, myself, I mean, all the time, we need to be distracted, right? Because in that presence, in that mindfulness, there's discomfort, so we put on music or we put on TV in the background, or because it does give the space a different energy. Like my daughter will go in our basement and she'll go play with her toys and she'll be like, Dad, can you put on the TV? I'm like, but you're playing with your toys. She's like, I know, but I want to have the TV, because she's scared, obviously. She's a little afraid of the basement. But she's like, it changes the energy. It makes it feel like there's something else going on. So if we could distract ourselves, right, from our own thoughts or our own fears. For her, she's 6. So she's not having the internal dialogue of like, what do I want out of life? But she is afraid of something, like an energy, right? So she needs this distraction, where as functioning, air quotes around functioning adults, we need to create a distraction from that silence, because in that silence arises those questions or that conversation and creates that discomfort. So you really have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you could find tangible expressions of that in the reality, right? Whether it be cold showers, sauna treatment, any type of physical endeavor. For me, it's Jiu Jitsu. For you, I know it's competition weightlifting. If you could find difficulty in sitting in things that suck, then you're able to create that mindset and not detract from the fear. And then you are able to sit in silence, and you are able to be more present when you're washing the dishes, because that conversation you're going to have with yourself isn't necessarily scary. It's something that might just give you information that now changes the way you think.
Yeah, he's become one of my favorite authors, and I want to read all of his books. His name's Robert Augustus Masters. His first book that I read was called To Be a Man, and it made such a clear connection with the internal selves, like our internal self, like what we needed to pay attention to. And it was mind-blowing for me, because I understood that I was not facing myself, that I was not allowing myself to face the things that are an issue for me. For example, my anger. I have a very unhealthy connection to my anger, but not like people would think. I don't have outbursts. I'm not out of control. I'm suppressed. I don't allow anger to be a thing. And I've learned to understand, and this is one of the biggest things about his book, or in that particular book, was that anger is a healthy thing. And I had that mind in it's just like, oh, there's somebody smarter than me that's been in this for a while. I believe them, and
right.
It's like my friends could tell me things that'll be like, nah, that doesn't sound right. And then somebody writes it in a book like, yeah, okay, totally.
Well, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? Like it takes, you have to be open to it, right? Like you could hear the same thing from 85 different people, but unless you're actually feeling it and receiving it, it doesn't mean shit.
Yeah, totally, man. And I honestly think that's part of our problem, is like we're not allowing ourselves to receive anything. Maybe, I don't know, but he was talking about anger being a healthy thing, and I was like, oh my God, it's okay. It's like I always made myself, I was like, oh, I'm better than other men because I don't get angry, because I don't blow up on my partner, because I'm not aggressive, because I'm not verbally or physically abusive. I'm fucking better. And then I realized, I was like, oh shit, I am lost because I won't allow myself to stand up for myself. I continue to be intimidated by all these people. Meaning that I also allow them to give me the expectations that I need to appeal to them. And I act out on whatever is accommodating to what they need from me to be comfortable. How can I act to make them feel comfortable? And I was like, oh, fuck. All this suppressed anger is a big issue. Like, this is a fucking problem. And it was weird because it was so opposite of what I thought the problem was. And coming into the truth that all of our emotions are healthy. Even anger is healthy. And he said it's how you do it. It's anger without aggression and pointing fingers and intimidation and the destruction of others. If you can do it without that, anger can be healthy because people can understand you. You can focus more. You can direct more. And that's something that I figured out that I was missing. So the problems that a lot of men can have can be so diverse, and that's why I think it's so important for us to understand our inner child, which is something he talks about repeatedly. Our inner child, our self-critic, our internal self-saboteur, all this fucking crazy stuff, man.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, any emotion you're feeling or experiencing, it's if it's all just data, right?
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
break it down to the micro level, it's just information, right? How you
Yeah.
interact with that information,
Mm-hmm.
what it actually brings out in you is based on the person, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like the feeling of anger, right? And also our emotional attachment to it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the calcified default mode that we go to when this thing happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? And whether we suppress anger or we lash out, or I'm sure it varies for people, obviously, right? It's a broad range. Same thing with anxiety, same thing with depression, same thing. We all experience all of these emotions. It's part of the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
But now, how do we interact with that? Because all that is stimulus, response, or reaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot that happens in between those things. But when you could have something happen and now you could shift your mindset and almost freeze it and slow it down till you respond or react, right? Because the reaction is the instantaneous thing. The
Mm-hmm.
response is the mindful approach to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just data. It's just a thing. Like, it's our
Mm-hmm.
relationship with that puts us in a spiral or puts us in a rage or whatever it is. It's the
Mm-hmm.
relationship we have with that. And now the management and the overview of our emotions, right? I refer to it as like matrixing your emotions, right? You have something happen to you and you have the ability to actually slow down and see it pass you and go, okay, what is this? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm feeling angry. Now you could stop it. I'm feeling angry, or you can dive deeper, right? And reverse engineer to like, well, why am I feeling angry? Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling angry because this person did this fucking thing. Well,
Mm-hmm.
why did that person do that fucking thing? Well, it's multifaceted. One, they're their own person. B, you did this. C, that. So I like to reverse engineer what I'm feeling in a moment, right? And say, okay, well, let's go back from this person's perspective. And that's so huge, right? For me, is recognizing that we're just another fucking person going through their own shit and they're
Mm-hmm.
bringing to the table their own shit. So yeah, it is about, that awareness of it. And it's just data. It's just information, and how you actually interface and interact with that information is on you, the individual, not the person or the scenario.
Mm-hmm. So what would what's tough is that it's similar, but I think our experiences make it different, or at least the the point in which we attack